Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, focused as it is on the vital concern of our times, sustainability, Madani, as you term it in Malaysia. It is a great honour to contribute, especially since the title given me by Dr. Muhammad Shafiq Burhanuddin is so inspiring. Ecological wisdom in traditional Islamic gardens. But what exactly does this mean? I've been pondering this question ever since it was suggested to me and feel I've only just touched the surface. The first slide should be up now and the icon of me reduced, please. I'm speaking to a largely Muslim audience, so we all know that the true Islamic garden on earth is a mirror, albeit a flawed one, of the eternal gardens of paradise, Jannat el-Firdaus, as described in the Quran in Surah Al-Rahman, chapter 55. To start with, it's important to recognize the two levels of the garden. The outward, physical, visible level, where we learn about its principal components, and the inward, metaphysical level. The outer level is the ever-changing temporal garden made with our own hands, the mirror. And the inner, invisible garden is the constant, imperishable garden of heaven, the manifest and the non-manifest, symbol and archetype. The outward symbol acts as a ladder towards, or a window onto, the eternal archetype. This link between the two levels is key to understanding the profound ecological wisdom embodied in the Islamic garden, a wisdom that is not truly acknowledged and indeed is much neglected. Let us now examine the term ecological. The fundamental meaning is that it is about relationship. That is, the relationship between all living beings, including humans, with their physical surroundings. Lord Northbourne, an English farmer and pioneer in the ecology movement, wrote in 1970, "Formerly, to quote, formerly man lived more or less in harmony with nature and played his part in maintaining what we call a balance of nature. That natural balance, if we could but see it so, represents a fulfillment of the divine ordinances, whereby all living things are related one to another through their common origin in God." End of quotation. This explicit acknowledgement that all living beings are related through their common origin in God is the crucial factor missing in the vast majority of environmental and ecological movements across the world today. Attempting to recover our ecological balance is already an uphill struggle, to say the least, but without viewing the natural world and all who live in it as a whole, as a divine unity weaving together the vertical and horizontal dimensions, it is well nigh impossible. This is where the particular wisdom of the Islamic garden comes into its own, since, like all traditional Islamic art, there is no separation between the secular and the sacred, the outer and the inner. The horizontal and the vertical are inextricably bound together. Today, the phrase ecological balance is often mentioned in reference to the fact that we human beings are no longer in balance or harmony with our natural surroundings. Not only have we woefully neglected our role as Khalifa, steward or vice-regent, but we have abused it horrifically, causing huge ecological imbalance, witnessed by the growing urgency of warnings and statistics about climate change, pollution, loss of species, and so on. It's important to recall here that one of the 99 names of God is Al-Muqsit, the one who keeps the balance, the equitable, the one who does everything with proper balance and harmony. There's no doubt that the quintessential Islamic garden, the Chahara Bagh, as you see in this miniature painting, or fourfold garden with the four rivers of paradise, is truly a representation of this balance and harmony. There are many types of Islamic garden, but this one, based as it is upon the four gardens of paradise in Surah Al-Rahman, reflects the order and balance of heaven, and is one of the chief aspects of the ecological wisdom that is the subject here. As is written in the Quran, to quote, "As for the earth, we spread it out and caused everything to grow there in perfect balance." Surah 15, verse 19. The Islamic garden is partly inherited from the ancient Persian prototype, which itself is based upon the four directions of space. And there is, or should be, inshallah, a perfect balance between the principal components, which I will say in brief. We have little time. First, an ordered fourfold layout, which you see an example of here at the Casbah in Seville, balanced with abundant planting. Water is supreme, of course, both running and still, if possible, and shade coming a second in importance to water. And the oasis is really the beginning of the Islamic garden, because it has these two key elements of shade in the water first, of course, which brings shade in the form of the palm tree. Enclosure is another feature, making it a kind of sanctuary from the world outside, whether it be a desert or a noisy, stressful city, where most of us live today. One of the reasons we all love to visit a well-tended garden is doubtless because it gives us a taste of a calm and balanced state of mind. There is a serenity and contentment to be found sitting enveloped by the green of the trees and the plants, with nearby water, the scent of roses, all evoking our ultimate home, the Paradise Garden. Another of the key components of the Islamic garden is right intention, and this goes hand in hand with an open mind and heart. If you intend with all humility to make a garden that reflects the Jannat al-Firdaus and follow this with an application of certain practical criteria, some of which we have just mentioned, then the ecological wisdom of the garden will, inshallah, gradually make itself known. This is the Alhambra, and this is, to come back to the United Kingdom, the walled garden at Highgrove, where His Majesty the King lives in this country. Another important name of God is Al-Muqit, which means the nourisher, the sustainer, and the preserver. And of course, sustainability, Madani, is the topic of this whole important conference. Today, people talk about sustainability all the time. I'm sure you've noticed. But as Dr. Martin Ling said, they do this with little reference to who is the ultimate sustainer, Al-Muqit. It is well known that our planet cannot survive at the rate of consumption that exists now. So more than ever, we need to be reminded that to be sustainable means to give back to the earth as much as we take out. Reciprocity is key. And this is Robin Wall Kimmerer's main theme in her marvellous book, Braiding Sweetgrass, which I highly recommend. Just as Mother Nature gives to us, we should give back to her. And this simple act means the earth remains sustainable. She calls this the honourable harvest. But such is the greed that dominates our planet. This notion of reciprocity has become a fairy tale. This is in Ibiza, an Islamic garden made about 15 years ago. Al-Muqit also means nourisher. God is nourishing the earth all the time in a multitude of ways, through water in the form of rain, through the creatures in the earth, through the earth itself, which of course is humus, and the Latin meaning to soil, and from which the word human comes. As is written in the Quran, man is made of clay from the earth. Thus we are inextricably bound up with this vital substance. And the more we nourish and sustain it, the more we nourish and sustain ourselves. This is true of everything we do in the garden, which needs constant and careful pruning, weeding and deadheading, watering and sowing seeds, as well as knowing when to let go and let nature take her course, which has become all important today, as I'm sure any practitioners in the audience will know. All these outer actions may be transferred from our gardening practice to our inner life. This is an example of the more abundant planting, more contemporary planting at the Cambridge Mosque, which I designed a few years ago with my colleagues. So in the garden, our practice in the garden, pairing is mirrored. It should be mirrored in our inner life, and it helps us with our inner life, pairing and transforming the obstacles of the soul, while nurturing the positive qualities such as patience and vigilance. They all contribute to the good relationship, the ecological balance between living beings and the natural world. When we feed the earth with compost and organic matter in order that our plants may grow with strength and vigour, We are, if you like, imitating God, bringing out the good, not just in our gardens, but also within each of us. Everything we do outwardly has an impact upon us inwardly. This is true of all traditional art, of course. Jalaluddin Rumi writing, "The real gardens and flowers are within. They are in man's heart, not outside." Of course, it may well be observed that gardeners across the world perform but what gives the Islamic garden its special dimension is, unlike the majority of the gardens of the modern Western world, that it encompasses both these levels. And this is one of the principal reasons, I repeat, for its ecological wisdom. And by the inward and the outward, we are also, of course, referring to above and below. The garden expresses a balanced relationship between heaven and earth, humankind being pontifex, the great bridge between the two. In these gardens, there's always an awareness that nature is a gift from God, and therefore the garden is a sacred acknowledgement of this, an expression of gratitude and prayer to the Almighty, if you like. All gardens act as perpetual reminders of the transience of this realm. The cycle of the seasons, which of course is much more apparent here in the Western world, in Europe, than where you are. The cycle of the seasons, life in summer, decay in autumn, death in winter, and then springing to life again. I heard something very nice just recently, a gardener saying that he viewed all the brown seed pods on his plants in autumn as beautiful signs of life, which of course they are. But until recently, the past 20 or 30 years or so here, they've been viewed as brown, decaying and unattractive, most people cutting them off, as they are no longer pretty and colourful. Today, with the rewilding and naturalistic movements, this is gradually becoming the norm, helping the garden to work with nature in order to increase biodiversity, reduce loss of habitat and nurture native species, insects and birds. This is all to help regain the ecological balance. But it's one thing, of course, to regain this or go towards regaining this on an outward level. It's quite another thing to acknowledge that it goes beyond this. It goes beyond what we see. And this is where the Islamic garden comes into its own. Anyone designing an Islamic garden today needs to follow these precepts we just talked about, as well as the traditional principles, in order to nurture and maintain the balance that the Islamic garden's wisdom aims to encompass, and traditionally always did. A wise Islamic garden may be created today and refreshed with every generation, providing the traditional principles are followed along with more contemporary naturalistic planting. Here at the New Cambridge Mosque Garden, we were keen to use plants which were both typical of the Islamic world, as you can see in the tulips here, which originated, of course, in the steppes of Turkey, as well as those which grow happily in the UK and in turn can promote sustainability. We planted here, as you see, the native crabapple trees, which produce this beautiful blossom in the spring and then fruit. Fruit, of course, being a very important element in the paradise gardens of the Quran. You see the fourfold plan of the paths. Very hard to do the 4 rivers of paradise today, just because of the upkeep and the construction costs, and of course water. We have to be very careful with conserving water. So this is balanced with this more lush, abundant planting. So you have this lovely order here, which of course you also get mirrored in traditional and sacred Islamic art. You get the order of the geometry balanced with the arabesque or the Islami patterns. And of course, with this naturalistic planting, it goes along with only organic fertilizers, of no insecticides, everything to promote pollinators and butterflies and birds, etc., which will all help in the regaining some kind of ecological balance. Again, to stress, the Islamic garden, there is always a consciousness of the sanctity of the natural world. All levels of nature are interconnected. Nature is a living whole penetrated by the spirit. This again is at the mosque, roses and salvia, sage. One could suggest that for this reason, such gardens may offer more in the way of solace from worldly problems or from our own preoccupations, since this attitude, as mentioned, is most noticeably missing in most gardens made in the West today and in the environmental movements. In our technology-obsessed world, we are encouraged to be in nature, and we need it for our own well-being and sanity. There is no doubt that we need to connect with what is truly living instead of the virtual living of the computer screen. Exactly what we are doing now. Finally, let us look at what might be termed the doorway into the ecological wisdom of the Islamic garden. This is a beautiful, very serene garden, as you can see. Dawlatabad, it's called, in Iran. Just the two key elements here of the Islamic garden, water and shade from the magnificent pine trees. The doorway may be opened by the inner eye. As the Quran repeats many times, we need to have eyes to see. And this is not the outer eye, this is the inner eye, the eye of the heart. Socrates stating that this eye is worth 10,000 outer eyes. Throughout the Quran, there are repeated references to signs and symbols, ayah, of God. And these are key to penetrating ecological wisdom. Why is this? Because the Islamic garden, like all expressions of true Islamic art, is inherently an art of symbols. Its underlying principles of order and harmony, as manifested in the Chahar Bagh, along with its principal components, and the fact that it is fundamentally inspired by the Quranic descriptions of the Jannat al-Firdaus, mean that we are required to read it like a book. As the Persian poet Sa'di wrote, "To the eye of a discerning man, every leaf upon a growing tree is a book imparting knowledge of our Creator." I would say that this quotation, this beautiful quotation, is vital to gleaning what is the ecological wisdom of the garden. We need to remember that Sa'di's leaf and all of nature is transparent, and the physical experience of gardening not only nourishes the soul, but strengthens our relationship with the divine. As Satish Kumar says, soil, soul, society. These are not just linked etymologically, they are linked at a profound level, each one feeding the other. Clearly, Islamic gardens differ enormously in their planting on account of the huge variation in climate and topography across the Islamic world. For example, in Malaysia, with your tropical climate and mainly hot, humid and rainy weather throughout the year, your garden will be very different from one, say, in Mughal India, North Africa, or indeed the United Kingdom, where I have designed a few small Islamic gardens, including the Cambridge Mosque Garden that we've looked at just now. This is the Shalimar Gardens in Lahore in Pakistan, originally part of Mughal India. However, here we are referring to the Islamic garden as such, as opposed to such and such Islamic gardens across the world, which of course are all expressions of the sort of the one truth, if you like. This is the Paradise Garden, and despite the great differences in climate and planting, the principles remain the same, with crucially underlying them all the vision of the Quran, with its central message of divine unity. What is truly important is the Islamic garden's recognition and representation of this unity between heaven and earth, between the invisible and the visible. It is via this profound understanding that the visible leads us back to the invisible, and these gardens are a wonderful vehicle for reminding us of this. So in order to learn something of the ecological wisdom of the Islamic garden, we need to see it fundamentally as a symbol. Being a representation of the Paradise Garden offers us the vertical dimension embedded in the beauty of the horizontal. This is the famous Patio de la Acequia in the Generalife, part of the Alhambra in southern Spain. The great Sayyid Hussein Nasr wrote, "To be at peace with the earth, one must be at peace with heaven." So let us remember that the only word spoken in the gardens of paradise is salam, peace. Thank you very much.